بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. So inshallah today we're moving on to the next lesson and we're studying Al-Khabar باعتبار وصوله إلينا. We're studying Khabar, which is ahadith or athar, based on how they've reached us, meaning the number of chains. We've done Mutawatir, Mashhur, Aziz and Gharib before. Always go through the text and a few more discussions. So he says Al-Khabru imma an yakuna lahu, and we'll go through that later on. But let's look at it here. In terms of these three words, I mentioned it a bit briefly in the introduction. But when you have hadith, khabar, and athar, these three words are synonymous. Okay, this is one opinion here. So one opinion is that these three words are synonymous. So basically, when you say hadith, khabar, or athar, they refer to marfu, mawquf, or maqtu'. That's why you have hadithun marfu'un, hadithun mawqufun, hadithun maqtu'un. So if you look at it really, it's a bit of an issue, a bit like, not contradictory, it doesn't add up, because we say al-hadith qawlu rasul wa fi'luhu wa taqriruhu wa wasfuhu, according to one definition. And then we say hadith maqtu', which is qawlu tabi'i. Because when they say hadith, they mean hadith al-marfu' is that definition. Yes, so just remember that. When we say hadith, the definition, and the hadith is also used for this. Again, remember these are terms, and terms are loose. It was a convention, it's all, different scholars use different words, different meanings. Yeah, so we have hadith al-khabar, athar. So one opinion is that these are all three synonymous. So hadith, khabar, athar, they all mean the same thing. Whether it's marfu, mawquf, or maqtu. That's one opinion. Another opinion he mentions here is that hadith is basically like marfu, mawquf, and maqtu, and khabar is basically like history or everything else, like the khabar of Sufyan al-Thawri or the khabar of the akhbar of Imam Bukhari. That's one opinion. And the third opinion is that hadith is for marfu and athar is for mawquf, like the aqwal of the sahaba. That's not the athar sahaba. So again, you have to see, it's not one right or wrong. You have to see, well, the author, what does he mean by this, his methodology. When he uses the word athar, what does he mean? When he uses the word khabar, what does he mean? Okay, so there's three different ways, or scholars. This is not the most common one, the one on the left-hand side here. That's not the most common. The most common is these two. Some people have used them synonymously, and some have used athar for mawquf. Follow? So just keep that one point in mind regarding these three words here. Now, whilst we're here, we mentioned the word athar. The Imam Tahawi rahimahullah. So Imam Tahawi, he was born in 238. So he wrote two books, and he used the word athar for hadith as well. So like obviously Imam Bukhari and those guys came afterwards. Okay? No, actually there's a similar era. Imam Bukhari passed away 256, so actually Imam Bukhari is slightly ahead of them. But in his book, he used the word athar, sharh athar, sharh mushkil athar. So the word athar in his book is using the meaning hadith. So he's got two books. One is ma'ani athar, one is mushkil athar. So ma'ani athar is basically like a fiqh book. It's like Abu Dawud or Tirmidhi, like he got the books of a hadith, but then he tries to explain the meaning of how do we explain the more fiqh oriented. And Mushkil Athar is also another book of Imam Tahawi rahimahullah, where he mentions like difficult hadith to understand or contradictions and that kind of stuff. Not necessarily fiqh discussions, but everything. So he discusses that. So these are two, and it's the earliest scholars, one of the earlier works. So it's not necessarily a commentary of the hadith. Those came out later on, but it kind of reconciles and he explains the meaning between the hadith. And whilst we mentioned Imam Tahawi, who passed away in 321, so he also wrote one of the standard book, one of the earliest books of Aqidah, called Aqidah Tahawiyya. And everybody uses this, whether the Ash'ari, Maturidi, Athari, they all refer back to this. So this is one of his books as well. Okay, so Imam Tahawi, so the main point here is Imam Tahawi, he used the word athar and athar to also mean the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not only the mawquf. And he wrote these two books, and there's also a third book. So let's get to know Imam Tahawi rahmatullahi alayhi as well. So he's saying here, mutawatir. What's mutawatir mean? We did already bayquniyya. What's mutawatir mean? That, yeah. Pardon me, go ahead. Yeah, so he says here, turuqun bila adadin mu'ayyan. There are many turuq. And turuq, it means here, turuq is another name for sanad. So there are many sanad without any number, just like a large number have been transmitted. Then you have mashhur, ma fawqa thalatha. in Mayquni, he says here, طرق محصورة بأكثر من اثنين is more than two. So 3 or more in every single tabaqa. Sahaba's time, Tabi'in's time, Tabu Tabi'i's time. This is called Al-Mashhur. Then you have Aziz, which is 2 or more in every, I don't know what's tariqan, but anyways, tariqan in every tabaqa. And then the Gharib is where there's 1 tariq in any place. You following? Okay, then he says, so he'll basically explain this in the next text. He says, Al-Khabaru, I don't know what's Al-Khabar, I suppose Al-Khabaru. Al-Khabaru imma an yakuna lahu. It will either have what? Turuqun bila adadin mu'ayyan. It will have turuq, meaning many turuq. Now, as I said before, hadith is made up of what parts? Sanad and the matan. But the word sanad has 3 other names as well. You have sanad, you have tariq, you have makhraj, you have isnad. And all 3 of these have the same meaning. Are you following? So, the simple words, they have sanad and a matan. But again, as I said before, it's mustalah. We learn terminologies, that we're just learning how the ulama use different words. So we know that there's a chain linking to us a text. That chain, some of them call it sanad, that's the most common one. But it's also known as tariq, turuq. It's also known as isnad. And makhraj also means the way it comes out, meaning the sanad. So all 3 of these words, all 4 of these words, sanad, tariq, makhraj, and isnad, all of these words have the same meaning in English, chain, the chain of narrations. Okay, so you should remember this, you have to know them because you know, like for example, I'm not sure, Imam Muslim, Imam Tirmidhi rahmatullah alayhi, he says, ma ulima makhrajuhu. The makhraj means here, chain. Are you following me? Yes? Okay. So, bila adadin mu'ayyan. When you have a turuq, you have a chain with many, without any number of chain, meaning not limited, it's like just a large number. أو مع حصر. So, أو مع حصر, or with a hasr. Hasr from balagha meaning restrict, confine, a confined number. A confined number. Like how many people narrate the Quran? It's just too many, we don't know. It's just so many from the Sahaba's time to the Tabi'in, to the Tabi'in time, just so many of them. But if there's unconfined, unrestricted, like just a large number, we don't even know how many there are. If it's restricted, meaning we know how many 7, how many 8, how many 9, how many 12. But it's what? Bima fawqa ithnatayn. So if they are a turuq, and they have a fixed number, a restricted number, but which are bima fawqa ithnatayn, but they're more than 2, that's called what? What's that going to be called? Mashhur. Correct? Aw bihima, or it is restricted to just 2 sanad, 2 makhraj. Aw bi wahid, it has 1. So he says here, the khabar can either have scenario number 1, scenario number 2, scenario number 3, and scenario number 4. And he says, Al-awwalu al-mutawatir, al-thani al-mashhur, al-thalith al-aziz, al-rabi al-gharib. You understand? That's how they laid out the structure. Understood? Everybody following me? Yes? So the word here, bihima, this hima is referring to like ithnatain. So it's hasar, it has a fixed number, but it's 2. The fixed number is 2, that's what it refers to. Okay. So for al-awwal, i.e. the one that has bila turuqin mu'ayyan, meaning so many numbers. So he says al-mutawatir. Al-awwal al-mutawatir. The first one is called al-mutawatir. What's it called? The first one? Mutawatir. We know that from Bayquni as well. Now here he's got this discussion. He's got this here. Al-mufidu lil-ilmi al-yaqini bi-shurutihi. Now this one here, this is basically something I've said, you know what, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he's kind of gone on a kind of a tangent. Not tangent, but he's kind of digressed. Because it's an usul hadith book, and this discussion is really usul fiqh discussion, epistemology, how do we get knowledge and how is knowledge to be certain, etc. I'm just going to go through it shortly. I'm not going to go through it too detailed. So basically he's saying here, when you have mutawatir, it gives you ilm al-yaqeen. What does that mean? It's not mentioned in the books of the shuruhat like this, but this is what I think it means, and I assume it means, if I'm right, hopefully right. Because they just explain it again, they don't really give much detail. So what we have here is you have 2 types of knowledge. We have here, you have what we call here qat'i. Qat'i, and we have dhanni. Okay? What does qat'i mean? Something is qat'a yaqta'u qat'an. You have a piece of cloth, you cut it, it's fixed, you can't change, you can't make any small, bigger, can you? You got a piece of cloth, you cut it, you cut it, it's fixed. You can't make it any bigger. It can't be, you cut it smaller, you can't get any bigger. Fix. And dhanna yadhunnu, what we call is speculative. I don't have the right translation. It just means here, it's not at the same level of qat'. Okay? So when we're talking about, it's also the fixed stuff, but this is a brief introduction. When we're talking about information, knowledge that we have, it can come to us in one of two ways, qat' or dhan. So when you say qat'i, like for example the Quran has two aspects. One aspect of the Quran is the way it's been transmitted to us. So we have such a large transmission from the Prophet ﷺ to the Sahaba, from Sahaba to Tabi'in, the Tabu Tabi'in, and it goes on. Now, we are 100% sure that the words that have reached us are the words that Allah's Messenger recited to the Prophet, recited to his companions. Are you following? Similarly, for example, because the March transmission is that 9/11, there were two buildings, and these two buildings were destroyed by a plane, or two planes. Now, there's such March transmission, you have videos and people and reports and everything. This is qat'an, like we're 100% sure it happened. You may have differences in the smaller details. Was it 100,000 people that died, or 10,000 people that died, or 1,000 people that died, or 100 people died, or was it what time, what hour, which building first? You might even get confused in those. But the fact that two buildings were destroyed, this is qat'an, is like 100%. You just know it for sure. Yes, like World War I took place, World War II took place, or the details of World War I, how many people died, or which battle was which. But the overall overlining is that you have, so this qat'i knowledge that you know 100%. Like London exists. There's a river called River Thames. It's a river that goes through London. So this is called qat'. We have 100% knowledge. So many people narrated it, or we either seen it or we know it. It's called qat'. So this is called qat'. We gives us, this is the same as yaqeen. Yes, we're 100% sure. But you have to remember here that there's two aspects. One is, this is now, so in when you say qat'an, we can have here, this in terms of thubut. What does thubut mean? The way it has been transmitted to us. And another one could be dalala. And dalala can also be qat'i or dhanni. Okay? Let me give you an example of one of this. If I say, for example, it comes in the Quran, Allahu Ahad. Allahu Ahad. Qul huwa Allahu Ahad. Qul huwa Allahu Ahad. Now this verse, in terms of its thubut, its transmission, proving its thing, transmission. What is this? Qat'i or dhanni? It's qat'i. 100% sure it has been transmitted to us from the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, and there's no, we have any, so all the Quran is qat'i thubut. Are you following? The meaning of Qul huwa Allahu Ahad is also qat'i. Like, there's no difference of the scholars regarding what this means, that Allah is one, our creator, He exists and He is one. He has no partners. La sharika la. There's no, so this is not qat'i in terms of thubut, the way it's been transmitted to us, and also in terms of the meaning it indicates. Are you following? You got it? Yes? Okay. Another example I can give you from Quduri, I can give you from Quduri. I won't leave the Quduri one. Let's say, for example, ثلاثة قروع. Now you haven't done this much, like, I don't know if you're Kitab al-Nikah and Talaqas yet, but we will do this. So what happened here, in terms of thubut, what is this? Qat'i or dhanni? The verse, ثلاثة قروع. This is going to be what? We are 100% sure the verse of the Quran. But this word here, quru', is a dispute in the meaning of this word. That when a woman is divorced, then she has to have a waiting period, and she has to wait for 3 quru'. Now what does quru' mean? Linguistically and from the Sahaba's time, there's an ikhtilaf in the meaning of this. So we're not 100% definite that this means this. There's two possibilities. So what kind of dalala? Dalala means implication, meaning. What we say, this is what kind of dalala does this give? Qat'i or dhanni? Dhanni. I won't say speculative, it's rather speculative, but that kind of demotes. It doesn't mean always speculating. This means, well, there's two possibilities. It's dhanni. Do you understand? So when you have a mutawatir event, a mutawatir hadith, again, there's a long discussion, four arguments, four against. I'm not going on that at the moment. When you have a mutawatir hadith, or you have mutawatir information, what it does, it gives us yaqeen that the people before you said it, and before you said it. So, for example, like, so it gives us yaqeen in terms of what? What does it give us yaqeen in terms of dalala or in terms of thubut? In terms of thubut. That, for example, is the hadith the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu minan nar." A very large number of companions narrated this. فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. So now this wording is qat'i, correct? And then the meaning here, I don't know if it's two meanings regarding, but then you can have the meaning regarding. So basically when you have mutawatir, it gives 100% conviction that this has been said. So that's why in mutawatir, you don't need to look at the sanad. Because there's so many asani, we have ilm al-yaqeen that this has been said. Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu minan nar. Are you following? You get it? So even though we're talking about hadith, like words, like certain things are mutawatir, like not in the wording, like but in terms of practice. So for example, Salatul Eid, we would say, for example, the Ummah performs Salatul Eid, or say for example, fasting Ramadan from the Quran is qat'i. But let's say for example, we could say for example, let's say for example Taraweeh, or let's say for example, Salatul, like performing extra Salah after the Isha in Ramadan. So from the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, it's been passed on. There's no wording that say the word is this, but we have records in history that from the time of the Prophet sallallahu, from the time of Umar radiallahu anhu until our time, the Ummah has performed extra salawat after the Isha. So it's not a word, but it's tawatur of amal, like of a practical tawatur. So this extra salawat is not farad, it's sunnah. But the way it's been passed on is like if you reject that, no, there's no such thing as extra prayers. There's a difference in the number. There's a number of rak'ah. Imam Malik goes all the way to 38, I think. The majority of the scholars, the four schools of thought go according to 20 rak'ah. And some nowadays have the 8 rak'ah. But the difference in that. But in terms of performing extra salawat, it's undisputed that in Ramadan the Ummah done this. The tawatur not of a wording, but tawatur of a practice. So anyways, when we say this here, is al-mufid lil-ilm, al-yaqeen. It gives us yaqeen, qat'i knowledge that this thing has been said. Bishurutihi, meaning what? There's sort of conditions for it. It can't be, I think, we all think this. If you think, then you're all thinking, you could all got it wrong. It has to be, for example, I saw the Prophet in Makkah. So, and sometimes you can get a mutawatir, not from one word, not from one, for example, it's mutawatir, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam lived in Medina Munawwara. Is there one hadith saying this? There's none in it, but you have so many ahadith pointing towards the same fact that this Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he lived in Medina Munawwara. Like, he entered Medina after the Battle of Badr, Uhud. He left Medina at the battle time of Uhud. He came back to Medina after the journey of Tabuk. He went to Hajj and came back to Medina. So none of them say, there's no hadith, one word saying, Asha Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam fil Medina. But all of these narrations, historical narrations, they point towards the fact that there's a person called Muhammad ibn Abdullah and he lived in Medina Munawwara. Are you following? So you have tawatur, exact wording. You have tawatur sometimes of practical tawatur. You have tawatur which all the different hadith, you can deduce one point from this. Are you following? So mutawatir, it provides ilm al-yaqeen, like qat'i knowledge, sure that this thing has been said, provided the conditions that have been met. Meaning it can't be opinion, it has to be statements, it has to be fact, a large number of people. It can be a large number of people, but they all come up from one room, for example. Let's say all of us, like 20 people from one room, we got together in a meeting, or we made up some kind of conspiracy. Or we got together in a chat room. It can't be like that. It has to be something like, you know what, it's impossible for them to come together and make up this stuff. So you can read those in more detail. There's some shurut, conditions. But if these conditions are met, then you get 100% surety that this is information has been stated. This is either a statement or a practical amal or etc. Everybody following so far? Okay. الثاني المشهور الثاني, when it's more than two narrators, more than three or more in each طبقة. Okay. وهو المستفيض على رأي. رأي means one opinion. So basically, in Bayqunya we had hadith Aziz, Mashhur, Gharib, etc. Certain scholars before, they also had the word Mustafiz, so they had different terms. So the Aziz, Mashhur, Gharib. So they also had a word called Mustafiz. This is not used, I don't know, in the earlier books, but like after Nukhbatul Fikar and the modern books which take off after Nukhbatul Fikar, this word Mustafiz, they just mention it as like a sub, they don't have a thing. So according to one opinion, Mashhur and Mustafiz is the same thing. So when you say word Mustafiz, it means the same thing. Some say the fuqaha use this word, etc. But it's not really that common. I've not come across it that often. Maybe in the earlier books. Wallahu alam. Are you following? Now, you have to remember now Mashhur, what does Mashhur literally mean? Famous. But you have to understand that each word, it has a terminology. So don't get mixed up with the literal meaning and the terminology, the mustalah meaning. So in mustalah, it is that hadith narrated by 3 or more people in each of its tabaqah. But you also get Mashhur, the linguistic Mashhur, famous. Utlubul ilma walau bisin. Seek knowledge even if in China. There's no standard for this. But it's famous, isn't it? Like it's well known. Like, you know, or you seek knowledge even if you go to China, people like, you know, it's like, but it's famous on people's tongue, but it's not got standard for it. It became famous somehow, somewhere down the line, somehow. So don't get mixed up with this. So you have Mashhur, when we talk about Mashhur, we talk about Mashhur al-Istilahi, in the mustalah of the Ahlul Ilm, the mustalah of the ulama of hadith. This means what? Which has turuqun mahsura, it has a limited number of chains, meaning we know them, but they're more than 2. In each tabaqah, from the Sahaba onwards, they're more than 2 people. And they have al-lughawi, meaning people just say, like very famous hadith, because we all, innamal a'malu bin-niyyat, it's a famous hadith. But it's gharib, it's not mashhur. It's a gharib mutlaq. Only Abdullah Umar radiallahu narrates it, from him only Al-Qalam narrates it, etc., etc. Are you following? So it's mashhur ala alsanatin nas. It's mashhur, people know about it. Everybody in the world knows about innamal a'malu bin-niyyat. But it's in mustalah, it's not mashhur. It's mustalah is what? Gharib. So don't get mixed up between the two. When the person says the word mashhur, what is meant by mashhur? Are you following? Understood? Okay. And once we have mashhur, there's one scholar by the name of As-Sakhawi rahimahullah. So Sakhawi is born 831, passed away 902. So then he's born in the 9th century. His teacher was Ibn Hajar. So Ibn Hajar's student As-Sakhawi. Okay, so if you look at Ibn Hajar was born 773 to 452. Okay, so his teacher was Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah. So we know who he is. We got a picture of him. He wrote this book, very famous book in hadith. It's called Al-Maqasid al-Hasana fi bayani kathirin min al-ahadith al-mushtahira al-al-sina. Meaning, the many hadiths that become famous on people's tongue, he's done takhrij of them. Okay, is this a hadith? Some of them not even a prophet statement, some of the sahabi statements, some of them are not a hadith, has no asal, no sanad. So in this book, he's compiled what is hadith mashhura, not from mustalah perspective. Which perspective? Just people, you know, watchali, that everybody knows, everybody talks about it. So he's got this book, okay, of mashhur hadith. But this is not mashhur mustalah. This is mashhur in terms of the people's wording of mustalah, people's wording of mashhur. Understood? Everybody following so far? Yes. And once we're here, just remember that Ibn Hajar, the student of Zainuddin al-Iraqi. So you have this is like a chain. Okay. So you have Zainuddin al-Iraqi, his student Ibn Hajar, his student is Sakhawi, and his Sakhawi's book. Okay. We'll just continue from here tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. So continuing from yesterday, we were just going through. We were going through the names of some books. So we were discussing the hadith mashhur. We said hadith mashhur has a meaning and terminology, which means what? It has minimum of 3 or more narrators in each of the tabaqat, each of the eras, from the Sahaba's time, Tabi'un time, Tabi'ut Tabi'un time, at least 3 or more. But the word mashhur is also used like a normal, it's famous, irrespective of technical differences of whether it's famous or not. And it's very important. For example, you get the word sunnah. So the word sunnah, it has like many usages. So sometimes it's you call this here equivocation, or the fallacy of equivocation. When you use one word, and in a particular sense has a particular meaning, and another place has another meaning. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ lived in Medina. That's a sunnah, his way, but that's not a sunnah in terms of like religion. Even here, the word mashhur, when the ulama use the word mashhur, I say it's not mashhur. So well, no, it is mashhur, right? Everything is mashhur right now. All the hadith of Bukhari are mashhur. Everybody knows the Bukhari, hadith of Bukhari, but they're not technically mashhur. So to clarify this and to like what those ahadith have become very famous and widespread, Imam Sakhawi rahimahullah, he wrote his book called Al-Maqasid al-Hasana to explain and to actually bring out the takhrij of the asanid, etc. And said to Sakhawi, he's a student of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, who was a student of Zayn al-Iraqi. And just so we can recap, Zayn al-Iraqi rahimahullah, he's the one who wrote the Fath al-Mughith, which is this is the Fath al-Mughith. He actually wrote the matan of this. This is the Alfiya of Iraqi. This is the wrong book. This is the Sharh of Alfiya of Iraqis. Okay, so he wrote the Alfiya, which Ibn Hajar, the Usul Hadith, which Ibn Hajar had memorized. So moving on, we have Thalithu al-Aziz. The third type of hadith we have is the Aziz. Now, we already done what Aziz is in Bayquni. It says here, the Aziz is the one which there are a minimum of 2 narrators in each tabaqa, meaning there's minimum of 2 in each level. And then he says here, وَلَيْسَ شَرْطًا لِلصَّحِيحِ خِلَافًا لِمَنْ زَعَمَهُ. This meaning being Aziz is not a shart for the hadith to be sahih, contrary to those, khilafan, contrary to those who assume this, who think this. وَلَيْسَ, and the fa'il of the ism of laysa is laysa al-azizu. So being Aziz is not a condition for the hadith to be sahih, contrary to those people who think this. So what he's saying here, there's one group who say that a hadith can only be sahih when it is Aziz, when it is narrated from 2 or more narrators from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, meaning from the Sahaba onwards, or maybe in some condition from the Tabi'un onwards. Basically, when it's a fard mutlaq, they don't consider a fard mutlaq to be sahih. Now, let me explain what's happening here. When it comes to hadith, we will inshallah discuss there's a whole discussion of the proof of hadith. The hadith actually are authentic, because obviously there's a group or many groups with different angles, different levels, who reject hadith, or they don't consider it to be a source of evidence. So the hujjiyah, the hadith being a source of evidence, is something which needs to be discussed in maybe another session or another course, inshallah. But if it is simply regarding the hadith, you can probably categorize 2 extremes. So one extreme, very oversimplified, is those basically who don't take hadith. So basically, is it inkar, who reject the hadith altogether. This is one level. And then you have another level over here. We'll explain that one here. So one level of inkar, meaning we don't accept hadith, is probably one level, which is like, they're not even like religious, like we don't take hadith at all, like no hadith. I'm not sure there's any group who can practice religion and just like this, oh, I believe in God and that's it. Because you cannot do, so any serious group of Islam does not go down this route, so we don't accept hadith all. There probably are some, like they just think of faith, that's it, you just believe and that's it, nothing else. Because obviously for salah, zakah, hajj, you can't practice religion, even that you can't practice religion without having some hadith, because it's similar to salah, how do you perform salah. So those who completely reject outright, there's not a serious group who believes in this. Okay? Yes, they probably are on the internet, on modernists, on something like, just, oh, I'm a believer and that's it, I don't practice. So maybe they have this philosophy, but any serious group who are mu'tabar, like who even worth debating with. The other group is, then you have another extreme. So there's one group, yes? You probably have some people who look at hadith and like, they take, for example, you can see here, you have one extreme is what, for example, they say qat'. So it's like some will say, well, hadith gives you ilm al-qat'i. That's one extreme, that like even if it's a gharib mutlaq, that will give you what I said to you, like qat'i, it's 100%, like there is no way it has to be the literal meaning of this hadith is what it is. It can't do anything else. If you reject anything from this, like you can't even reinterpret it, you can't even try to fit it in. I think, but the hadith says this, it has to be 100%. You probably have something like that. Then you also have people who fabricate hadith, like this, trying to over practice. You have like normally the Sufis, the Sufis. When I say Sufis, are always a very large term. It doesn't refer to every person who's trying to do amal, but like the ghulat of the Sufi, like they even fabricate hadith, trying to get people to do amal. Like, oh, if you do this, like, you know what? If I make a hadith, people practice upon this. So then they fabricate hadith. So you have some people who go that extreme, trying to get everything down this level. Then in between that, you have kind of a spectrum of how much you accept, how you analyze. So from here on, one towards this one, you have the Mu'tazila. They're more towards more skepticism. Not skepticism, unfair to say them. They're more precautious and maybe towards skepticism regarding a hadith. What do they say? That unless a hadith is, like for example, Allah says in the Quran, you only take a shahada of two people. So unless you have a shahada of two people, then what? It is not accepted. Shahada. You have to have two people, shahidain. So still if a hadith you have to have shahid. Obviously there's evidence against this. Imam Bukhari in his Kitabul Ilm, he mentions evidence against the Sahaba. One person would go and convey the Prophet's message. Two people, one person would go and Prophet said one person. So you can, one person's statement can be accepted. But the Mu'tazila, what they do, they say no, unless the hadith has some kind of, just like a sanad is not enough. And this is some of the conditions they mention. Like, and so there's certain conditions. One condition is what here, this one. So they say here, number 1, number 2, and number 3. They probably have more conditions or more detail, but it's a brief understanding. What they say here, that maybe, so it doesn't have to be aziz in terms of the exact wording, but adadahu zahiru khabarin akhar or muwafaqatun zahiru kitab. That if this hadith, the hadith that we're discussing, there must be another hadith somewhere down the line, which is which what we call a shahid. We do that later on. We haven't done that in Baykuni. A shahid, which meaning it says yes. For example, if we say, for example, innamal a'malu binniyat. This is for mutlaq. This is for mutlaq. There's no narrator up from Umar radiallahu anhu, Ibrahim al-Taymi. It's all for mutlaq. But this also matches the Quranic verse. What's the Quranic verse? وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. That they may command to worship Allah sincerely. So this hadith is okay, this is acceptable. So even though it's khabar wahid, it's got the condition of sahih, but it also matches the Quranic verse. So then it's not a problem. It has to have some kind of backing. If there's a fard mutlaq about, let's say, the fast of Ashura, then they say, well, is there another hadith that backs it up? Give it some kind of taqwiyah. Because they look at it that the possibility of khata, not kadhib, khata and misunderstanding is possible. So looking at this, they look for some other supporting evidences. So just as the muhaddithun, when they say the rawi, so if you remember, when we discussed fard previously in Baykuni, what do we say? That if the rawi is da'if and he does tafarrud, that becomes munkar. Remember? If the rawi does tafarrud and he's a weak narrator and he does tafarrud, the hadith becomes munkar. Or becomes munkar, or like becomes what, like, unknown. Yes? And not unknown meaning is like munkar, meaning something questionable. They would say even if the rawi is thiqa and is gharib mutlaq, they would say, well, they would call it also shaz basically. They would call it a tafarrud. Do you understand the different levels what they're saying here? Are you following me? Another condition to put down is, yes, these two are very similar. Okay, I'm not going to go, it's not my job to go into all this detail. But the third one here is that, okay, if it's a khabar wahid, there's no other hadith, but we have evidence of the Sahaba practicing upon it. If the Sahaba practice upon it, we get some kind of itminan that, yes, it's a gharib mutlaq, maybe it's one narration, two narration, but you have hadith that, for example, the Sahaba done this. So which means that the rawi's understanding of the hadith is correct. Because remember, once the hadith is sahih, they have a possibility, like sahih means what? The rawi is adil, dhabit, etc. But there's still possibility that there's an error. There's still possibility there's shudu, there's still possibility some illa, there's still possibility something misunderstood. So by the Sahaba doing amal upon this, when another Sahaba or some Sahaba doing amal upon this, that means that no, even though there's one wording that has reached us, the Sahaba's amal shows that this was the understanding of deen in the Prophet ﷺ's time. So that's it. So basically they're looking for, the same way we say, for example, one hadith of a khafiful dhab narrator becomes munkar. They say even if it's what? Even if this hadith is ta'amul zabt, we will not accept it unless there is some kind of other shahid or testimony for it being sahih. So that's how they look at it. So Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he's doing rad on this, and this is the opinion of the Mu'tazila. So Mu'tazila as a jama'ah we come across quite often. I discuss another group. So Mu'tazila, we shall discuss another group another time inshallah. So he's saying here that being aziz is not a condition for the hadith being sahih, contrary to these people. Khilafan liman za'amahu, contrary to those who assume this. If it's za'ama, not like man qala bihi, za'ama, who assumed this, meaning to show that this methodology, in his opinion, is weak. You understand what's happening here? Any questions? Warabi al-gharib, and the rabi is gharib. You already know this from the Baykuniya. So now what he's saying here, وَكُلُّهَا سِوَى الْأَوَّلِ آحَادُ. So remember, he gave 4 types. He said this: the al-awwalu al-mutawatir, wa huwa al-mufidu li-ilm al-yaqini bi-shurutihi. Then wa-thani al-mashhur, wa-thalith al-aziz, wa-rabi' al-gharib. So what he's saying here, basically, that apart from the first one, if you have al-hadith al-mutawatir, that's one name for that. And apart from the mutawatir, all of the rest are ahad. Those are called khabar ahad. So the discussion is in this ahad here, ahad. But the Mu'tazilite, well, obviously the Mu'tazilite disagree in this one here. But all the rest are called ahad. Are you following? All the rest are called ahad. So in mutawatir, what happens in mutawatir? I just said it gives ilm al-yaqini, meaning what? It becomes qat'iyyu thubut almost. Not the same as the Quran. It gives, because so many people are saying it. Like even logically, when we have, like let's say for example, in this weekend Champions League final, there was problems outside at the gate in a stadium. Now BBC is reporting it, CNN is reporting it, it's on Twitter, it's on everywhere. We know something did happen. It's like you don't say, well, who's the source of this one? So many people narrating it. We've got videos, we've got this. There's so many sources coming. We just know, you know what? Something did happen. Was it? What was the cause? That's now ahad. One person said, I had a fake ticket. One person saying no, that they were storming the gate. So one person said, no, this was the police fault. And that's all ahad. But the fact that there was unrest or something, there was commotion outside of mutawatir, nobody even questions the source of this. You understand? So for example, if there's a commission or there's a review or something happens, they're not going to try to, the judge or whoever's running the commission or whoever in review, they're not going to try to establish the fact of the event taking place. That's mutawatir. They won't even question that. When each person gives the testimony, they will question the testimony of each individual person. Because no, that's ahad. That needs scrutiny. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Go ahead with your question. See, mutawatir is in every single tabaqa. From every single, like, there is not a single point where, see, if at any one point, the narration depends on a single person, then that becomes ahad. So let's say, for example, there could be a rumor of a murder, and that it can become widespread. The whole of Leicester talking about it, but the one person who saw the murder, he's one person. That's ahad. Becoming famous, remember, mutawatir is every single, so let's say, for example, hundreds of people, tens and hundreds of people narrated this problem. And then from them, there's hundreds of people more passing on. So from the actual event, this is the event here. And people narrating are numerous. And then from them, you get even more people narrating it. If, for example, you have an event, 2 people narrate it, and then it becomes very famous, that would not become mutawatir because everything depends on these 2 people. What if they saw wrong? What if they conspired to lie? What if they made a mistake? What if misunderstood? So mutawatir means in every single tabaqa, every single layer of the chain, every single like passing on chain, that's mutawatir. Understood? Yeah. So what we're saying here is a mutawatir, we can analyze each narration for the sake of it, but overall, if, for example, man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan, whoever lies against me intentionally, then he should get ready to go to Jahannam. This is the Prophet's statement. Now, many Sahaba have narrated it, from them multiple Tabi'in have narrated it, so many, a large number. So we say, well, this hadith, I don't need to go and check its sanad, because it's coming with such large narration that there's no need to check it. And we know from the initial source, from the onset, from the beginning, from every Sahabi time was large. So that the Quran is mutawatir, the man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan is mutawatir. All of these things have tawatur. So now you don't need to analyze it. The rest is ahad. Now ahad, you have to analyze ahad. Is it maqbool? Is it? I'll explain it in the next lesson, inshallah. So have you understood? So you know mutawatir, mashhur, aziz and gharib. But the new term that he's added in here is ahad. Meaning, this is the muhaddithun way of doing it, that everything apart from the mutawatir is called ahad. And all of those need some kind of analysis to see whether they're sahih or not. Understood? Any questions? Okay, let's stop here inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.